Welcome to the Disrupt Leaders podcast. We're episode 4. And once again, I'm joined by the swoliness, the host with the most, Bill Walker himself. And we've got a banger off a topic today, Bill. What are you excited to talk about?
Hi, today, Jules, I'm super excited to be talking about challenges in leadership. I say this all the time, excuse my French. Everyone wants to be a gangster until it's time to do gangster shit. We've heard that cliche. Everyone wants to be a leader until it's time to do leader things. What do you think?
Da-da-da-da-da. A bit of that. I just was thinking that just when you were saying it. For sure. When you listen to podcasts and you listen to all these fantastic people, Jeff Bezos, all these people, they go, it's leadership sounds like a bed of roses, right? But the reality is leadership is challenging. It sometimes can be hard. We've spoken about this before. It definitely is primarily boring.
100%.
Yeah.
A lot of people in contact centers, in my team especially, and I've seen this in 100 places before, think leaders mostly just do one-on-ones, do huddles, and then sit around laughing and joking. And I think that's the perception that's put out there. But it is most definitely not that.
Well, what we want to do is, just dive into some of those topics today, give you some tools to deal with the things that are not so great, and share some examples that you can relate to in terms of those challenges we all have in leadership. Bill, I'll get you to kick off, mate. What is the first topic you want to run through in terms of challenging stuff for leaders?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It is one we've touched on a little bit in the past, but I think it's time we flesh it out, and more so from new leaders' perspective, how to deal with it. And that is the fact that leadership is boring. 90% of the things you are going to be doing are going to be dull, unfortunately. I hate to break it to you out there. Now, I say this all the time to a lot of my people when they're looking at moving up in a contact center role is everybody looks at the things that they like about a role that they want to move into. For example, with coaching, I used to look at, with leadership rather, I used to look at coaching and be like, I can't wait to do one-on-ones, can't wait to develop my people. But I don't know about you, Jules, I think it's equally as important to focus on the things that I don't like about the role and make sure I can deal with those and handle those. And the example I always give when it comes to contact centers is quality management. If you're on the phone, you're like, quality management sounds amazing. They just listen to calls all day. I don't even have to be on the phone. It's incredible, which is great if the positive for you is being off the phones, but it's not so good if you can't handle the negative of listening to 100 calls a day. Because I don't know about you, Jules, listening to calls as a team leader, I have to do at least 2 per week per consultant. I'm probably doing heaps more than that. It's very tedious. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. Can be boring as bad shit. And especially, it depends on the quality of calls that you're listening to. It can be soul-crushing to listen to calls or like look at chats sometimes. And the amount of times as a performance coach that I get leaders or other coaches come to me and goes, how do you get all your call listening done in a week or whatever the case? Because the fact is, one of the reasons they don't get it done is it's challenging in terms of their schedule. But let's face it, the other reason is it's probably boring. They probably go to the more interesting parts of leadership, or there's something else that's a bit more shinier that's taken their attention. And so this becomes a thing that falls on the wayside, but it's so integral for what they do.
Cut in a little bit, but it's also a little cringe at times. I don't know if you feel this way, like you listen to a call, especially if you've got a consultant that you know you need to work on, you know that they're struggling a little bit, you've got to listen to some of their calls, you know they're not going to be good. And you spend the entire time, like when you hear the customer say what they want, and then your consultant says something back that has nothing to do with what the customer's just said, and you feel yourself die inside a little bit. Definitely happens to me. I've literally listened to 5-minute calls, and it's taken me 15 minutes to get through it because I've had to keep pausing and walking away because I'm cringing so hard. I don't know if that's happened to you. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah,
and I think you're right as well. I think saying I don't have time to do calls is an excuse that leaders that are lazy say. That's my personal opinion. Anytime I hear someone on a Friday at 4 o'clock be like, oh, I've still got some calls to do, I don't believe it. So I guess I'll give a bit of advice. I'll give a couple of tips for the listeners out there for how I do it and how I make things a little bit interesting for myself. I don't know, Jules, you might have a tip afterwards as well. So the first thing I do is I actually have time scheduled in my calendar to do my mandatory ones. So you might not have to in your role. I have to do 2 calls per consultant per week, as I mentioned. So what I do on a Monday afternoon, I get 1 done for every single person. I book aside 2 to 3 hours. Like I book a good chunk of time, more time than I probably need to just like blast through at least one so I get ahead of it. And then I set the second one to be Tuesday or Wednesday. And that frees me up the back half of the week to do my more targeted coaching. So I can just pick on the 1 or 2 people that I've really set some expectations or goals with. The other thing that I do, and I don't know if I'm supposed to admit this, I also try to gamify it and make it fun for myself a little bit as well. So I give myself like a little bit of a reward. Maybe we'll listen to 2 or 3 and then we'll watch a couple of videos on TikTok. Do you know what I mean? Or maybe I'll read a chapter of manga or something like that. I'll give myself a little bit of reward because it is going to be boring. It is going to be cringe. And it just helps me get through it if I know 2 calls, take a little break. 2 calls, take a little break. What about you? What do you do, Jules?
I love that. Getting up from your desk and just walking away. Sometimes I have to do that. I don't know. I think I borderline
100%.
ADHD to swear to you probably, Bill. So I can't handle too much of it, to be honest. So I do have to break it up. There's 100% the tip I want to share
Yeah.
as well. But beyond that, it's also being really targeted with what you want to listen to. I think if you just listen to any and every call or chat this person's taking, then you're probably not going to get much meaning out of it. You want to really be targeted. So if you're looking for trying to reduce how long they're
Yeah.
taking on calls or chats, then you want to listen to obviously longer ones, but you don't have to listen to all of it all the time either, to be honest with you. Sometimes you can listen to certain parts of it in between holds. What are they doing? What are they doing when they're on the whole time? For example, you can be really targeted. Therefore, you're not wasting all that brain space on a 30-minute call. You don't need to listen to all of it. Sometimes, here's a tip to new leaders out there who are leading frontline people. People who have longer calls usually stuff it up in the first 5 to 10 minutes anyway. If you look at like really laser focus on the first 5-10 minutes, you will probably find out what's causing these behavior delays. You can be a little bit more targeted and go from there as well.
I have another little tip around that. Mate, listening to calls at 1.5 times speed is a game changer. Once you discover that, the second half of your life begins. Getting through 6-minute calls in 4 minutes, let's go. Literally, I'm at the point now that when I listen to people like in real time, in my head, I'm like, why are they talking so slow? Because obviously I talk pretty quick anyway, so I can listen pretty. And so listening to someone at 1.5 times speed all the time and then hearing it one time just really trips me up and throws me out. So I think that's one thing, right? And I think definitely gamify a little bit. Make sure you're taking regular breaks when you're getting through it. But I also think just book aside that time, commit to getting it done and power through. It's definitely not the only part of the role that's boring. I don't know. There's definitely sitting through meetings that are not that interesting. There's definitely doing a lot of data-based stuff, reading through data and going through spreadsheets. Now, for me, we're going to separate those two things. If we're talking about the data side of things, are a little bit boring. I don't know about you, how I get through that is the same thing. I go very specific with what I'm looking for, and I start to try to focus on the things with my thoughts, what I was working on with the consultant last week. I'm going to probably track all of their stats, but I probably pay more attention to the ones that I'm like, oh, I know that Stephen, should pull the name out of thin air, Stephen's really been working on his ACW. How was he last week? And I think that little boost of serotonin when I see that his ACW has come down, that is what gets me through the rest of doing my stats and data. What about yourself?
For 100% reporting, stats and data, just mind-numbing stuff generally. Make it interesting, color coding, that kind of stuff as well. Like I know you are a big believer in this when you're sharing with your team. Color code, if you're doing really well, it's a green, and that kind of is exciting. Sometimes as a leader, you go, oh, geez, like this person's gone from red to green, and that kind of is like that champagne of victory again we spoke about before. And so
100%.
you can celebrate certain moments, automate stuff as well. Hey guys, there's something called ChatGPT out there, right? So you can go find ways to automate some of these Excel processes. I don't want to hear anyone say, I don't know how to do this on a certain thing. You can go ChatGPT or YouTube, whatever, right? You can find ways to automate a lot of those things for yourself, or go to a colleague that's a whiz on Excel. Find ways to automate those. You will, 100%. Every department has one person at least who knows a little bit about Excel. Get behind them and go, hey, is there a way to do this so I don't have to do this manually? Cut down the amount of work you need to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the last thing we'll touch on before we move on in terms of the challenge of leadership, to be honest, meetings. Meetings are boring. 90% of the time. 90% of the time. Not the ones with my people. They're usually plenty fun. But there'll be a lot of meetings that I'll be in where maybe we're talking about stats. Maybe we're going through those few bits and pieces. And it can be interdepartmental a lot of the time. I've had this at every organization I've ever run through. And when the people from my area are talking, I listen because it's relevant. And then when other areas, maybe not so much. And so a little bit of kind of advice around this one for me. First things first, if you're going to a lot of meetings and you're finding there's no value there, just pass that feedback on to your leader. I think it's something that not everybody's comfortable to do. I know when I started my current workplace, there was a few meetings that weren't really working. And the instant first thing I said is, what value are we actually getting out of this meeting? What are we trying to get? What are we getting? How do we change it? And we ended up completely pivoting our Monday meeting so that it was actually more focused on like behaviors and actions rather than just numbers. Significantly more interesting. The second thing, aside from passing on feedback, be the change you want to see in the world. Bring the vibes. They call me and Jules a special vibes unit for a reason. Every single meeting probably that starts with 2 to 3 minutes of me just talking absolute nonsense, but just trying to get a little bit of energy, get people hyped up a little bit, get people to be like paying attention. I've got a fun fact for you, Jules. This is a fun story from my time as a BDM when I was like traveling BDM for an insurance company. I used to work quite heavily with a bank. That was what I did. I looked after a bank. And I once had one of the regional managers call me up and she was like, look, can you come and talk for 20 minutes on Friday? And I was like, yeah, sure. What's the reason? And she's like, oh, I actually got someone from credit cards coming and she's really boring. So I think if I put you first, you'll hype everyone up enough that they can sit awake through her thing. And to me, still the single greatest compliment I've ever been told. Still the single, apart from when my mum told me I'm a handsome boy, obviously.
But surely that's a big mistake, right? So let's get the boring guy to talk after the interesting guy. That guy's got to bomb hard, right? Surely. What are they doing? That's
I don't know. I didn't stick around. I did my part and then I leave. I do my bits. Get out of there. I'm not sitting through this. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Got another meeting. Got a jet. Sorry about it. But yeah, bring the energy, bring the vibes, be the change you want to see in the world. I think that's the biggest advice I can bring you. If you feel that the meetings are not fit for purpose, if you feel that they're boring, don't leave it to somebody else to fix those issues. Take initiative, take charge, because it'll also look really good in your year in review. Every workplace has one. If you can present these meetings were not fit for purpose, I suggest you change. This is what the change led to. Look how great I am. Pat me on the head. Profit.
Correct. And the thing with leadership, right, that those who can communicate best are usually just seen as more proficient. Whether that's fair or unfair, that's just how the world works.
Is what it is.
So working on your delivery when you are given that opportunity to deliver or come into those meetings and add a bit of vibes, please do that. Take that opportunity. That's the way you can show the other people what the benchmark should be. So whenever I'm asked to present at a meeting or something, I want to make it really engaging. I'll 100% throw some jokes in. I won't take things too seriously. There'll be points of the conversation that I need it to be serious for sure, but I want that also to be points of levity where people feel comfortable jumping in as well, challenging some of the things I said, because then I can have a two-way conversation as well.
On that, I agree with you. And the other thing I'll add to that, I think being that little bit lighter at points makes the more serious points hit harder. Do you not agree? If it's all serious, it's all monotone, it's all boring, I'm not paying attention. Whereas if we're up here and then all of a sudden I'm focused, locked in, serious, this is what we need to do, this is why we need to do it, I think people pay more attention.
You need runways for planes to take off, right? The plane's really interesting. It's fantastic. It's got a jet engine. It looks really cool. You got drinks on there, but the runway, the boring part, that's you need that for planes to take off. So you want to really jump in, throw some jokes in as well to also make those kind of big points or changes you want to really drive land as well.
Correct. So I think we've touched on that one a lot. I think so. One of the first things we've obviously spoken about is the workplace is pretty boring. I think that one of the other key challenges that I think people may be aware of going in, but not necessarily how it presents itself, is top-down pressure, so downward pressure. So the pressures your leadership will put on you and maybe communicating things that you don't necessarily agree with or don't want to agree with. What are your thoughts on that, Jules? Is that something you've experienced a lot in your workplace? I know it's something I have previously. Talk me through it.
All the time. I think as a leader, everyone has a senior on top of them, unless you're the CEO. Even they've got board of directors to answer to. Everyone's got a boss. Sometimes they're going to give you directions or actions to do that might not really sit well with your personal values. This has happened multiple times for me across multiple businesses. But a good example is a leader will walk up to me, or a senior leader might walk up to me and say, hey, I just noticed there are people on the floor, sales or service, that are on their phones or they're having personal conversations whilst it's work hours or whilst they're meant to be working. Essentially what they're saying there is make sure your people look busy, right? Now, personally for me, I couldn't give a toss if people look busy. I care if they are actually doing what they're committed to do. Personally for me, I'm not one of those people who walk around with a beer in my hand going, drop your phones in, you won't see this on the end of the day, you're in prison, or airplane mode only, don't ever talk to anyone.
Pull the fun police badge out?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Get the fun police badge out. Excuse me, no fun at work.
Correct. Your outside life, inconsequential. People can die, but you are changing lives here, mate. So get behind it.
Excuse me, if you could get in the queue, that'd be fantastic. I don't care that you had a great weekend, all right? Lucky weekend.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Don't talk to Becky about her boyfriend. Let Becky be.
What was it from The Bear, that sign?
Yeah. So The Bear, which is Amazon Prime show about chefs, and like they have the sign that says every second counts, I think is what they say. And they accept that sign to show that, hey, make sure every second counts. Sure, it works, but we're not chefs. We cook, but we're not chefs. You know what I mean?
Facts, big true. Yeah, My people cook, but they're not chefs. Don't make me take the sign, people. You should be working.
Correct, 100%. So for me personally, I just don't like to do that. I'd rather have a coaching conversation, a conversation about responsibilities. If they are not producing the work they've not promised to produce, I will have that conversation with them one-on-one or even as a team. If I see it's a team issue and at the end of the week, the stuff they've promised to do isn't getting done, then I'll have that conversation. The tip for me is with that kind of stuff is be honest with your people, right? Like I'm all about transparency. So I'll walk up to them and go, hey, just letting you know, so-and-so has noticed that if you're doing X, Y, Z. Now, personally, you know how I am. I'm not so concerned about what you're doing as long as you deliver on your work. But just make sure when they're walking around, be on your best behavior, so to speak. You keep your phones out of sight just when they're around, just so it makes my life easier, makes your life easier. It just doesn't create any conflict. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I agree with you 100%, and I pretty much handle it the same way. The way that I always phrase a conversation is I always mention that senior leadership consider this to be a focus, consider this to be an issue. Prime example, and it's not just the current place I work, but it's every workplace since COVID, is office attendance. Every workplace seems to have this big thing at the moment for getting people in office, if 2-3 days a week minimum, no matter what. Me personally, I don't really care, right? As long as you're hitting your numbers, whatever. But I let my people know in that instance, look, senior leadership find that this is important at the moment. We really want people in the office. We want people in 2 days a week. And then I just give them the benefit and the reason to why. From that perspective, it's all about optics. If you've got a senior leader walking around and you're sitting there on the phone, what do you think they think of you? Whether or not there was anything you should have been doing at the time, whether or not there was a calling to you or not, what do you think that they think? And it's the same with office attendance. If they're looking at that, it's important to the business, and your name's on the list of people that didn't attend, how do you think that looks when you know that it's the party you contract the party's supposed to? And so I maybe myself don't necessarily care, but it is important to the business at the end of the day. And it comes back down to that 4 streams of expectations. One of those expectations is leadership. And if they have those rules, they have those rules, right? And I think who am I to like challenge it? Maybe I'll have that conversation with my leader and just be like, hey, personally, I don't necessarily disagree, but I'd never let my people know that I disagree. I don't think.
Yeah.
But I think I would have, but I would also let them know exactly where that directive is coming from, much to your point.
Yeah, I love one thing I want to really pick apart before we move on to the next topic that you said right now. And I did a TikTok early in the week around that as well, but benefits-based leadership. It's something that salespeople do really well that we can all copy from as leaders is make sure you give the people the benefit of doing something, not only the features, so to speak, right? So just make sure when you're having a chat, just go, the reason why we think you should be off the phone is X, Y, Z. What's that going to do for you? You're going to have, as you said before, better optics. That's the actual benefit. The benefit isn't that you get your work done. Nobody cares about that. You know what I mean? The benefit
it looks like you're getting your work done. That's the benefit.
Correct. 100%. The optics are the benefit here, brother. So get behind it.
It is much like the gym. No one cares about how much you can lift. They care about how much you look like you can lift. That's the exact principle that we care about, right? And it's the same at work. No one cares how much work you do. It cares about how much work you look like you're doing. Please don't take that seriously. Literally, just right there, be like, oh, Bill and Julian says doesn't matter how much work I do. Which is quite a nice segue, actually. Yeah, unfortunately, I have to. We've got bills to pay. That's why we started this podcast, right? Because we're not Fortune 500 company owners. We do actually have to go to work. Now, which brings me very nicely into our next topic, something that I don't think people realize about leadership, and that is being team leaders are a lot of work. I touched on this right at the start of the video. I think sometimes, particularly in previous workplaces I've had, people think that, because I was in office, they're like, see, you'd have a 2-minute conversation with your coworker, you're like, oh, team leaders do nothing. One-on-ones coaching, and they spend the rest of the time doing nothing. But as we've mentioned, there's a lot of like tedious things that you have to go through, like going through the data, listening to calls. Like they're not short tasks. They're tasks that take a couple hours. But then on top of that, you have other pressures as well. For example, you could be put onto a project. You could have things, your leader needs you to get this done. Maybe you're working on something with the readiness department as well, or some other department to implement a change. And then on top of that, on top of your core responsibilities is additional responsibilities. I also am responsible for 10 people, 12 people who throughout the day are asking me for help. And probably some of the other teams, when their manager on lunch, are asking me for help. And you've only got so many hours in the day. But at the same time, I've got to do all these things and I've got to help people. And my point that I want to touch on before I pass over to you, Jules, is around this. I find some leaders find that really irritating when people are like asking them for favors. Like, I'm busy, I've got this project to do, and my people keep asking me questions, and that's what you pay to do. That's what they pay you for. That's your job. Your job is to be a leader, it's to help those people. That's priority one. That's the first thing you should be doing. What do you think?
That's what bins of bacon home. Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, I agree as well. The amount of times as a coach and as a leader, so people go, oh, you guys, all you guys do is X, Y, Z. Especially frontline workers, I think people on the phones actually doing quite a bit of volume of work. They assume that maybe people higher than them don't do the same amount of work or don't have the same pressures. And it's true in a lot of ways. I think as you get more and more senior with an organization, the thing that changes is that you sometimes might do less volume in terms of frequency of work. What I mean by that is, so when you're actually talking to customers, you're talking to a lot of customers, right? Like if you're in a contact center, you're probably talking to 30, 40, 50, sometimes more, 100 customers in some case, right? So you think, oh, I'm just doing this much of volume of work, whereas maybe the leader's not doing as much volume. The difference is, as a leader, the things that you're doing are more impactful in terms of a wider audience. You know what I mean? So you might be doing things that are affecting all 10, 15, 20 people you have this at that time, or maybe your whole department if you're doing a project, or the whole of the company. And so it takes a lot more focus in those kind of scenarios, I guess is the best way I can put it. So there's times when Bill, you and I, we're big on set hours, right? Like we will try to work as much as possible within our kind of set hours and be more efficient. And whether we have to cut things short by 5 minutes here, whatever, to make sure that we can fit the things within our working hours, we'll do it where we can. But the fact of the matter is, there are days when you might have to stay back a little bit more, or there are times when you got to maybe shorten your lunch a little bit or come back early from your lunch because something's just going down, and whatever the case is.
Yesterday, so at the time of recording this, that big Microsoft outage that took the entire country by storm happened in my workplace. And so I ended up having to stick behind work yesterday for an extra hour and a half, which may not sound like much, but it was a Friday night. And who wants to stick behind work on a Friday for an hour and a half? All my people had gone. Right, they all got to go home. But as a leader, I had to stick around, help work on the contingency plan for what they're going to do, how we're going to make sure the lines are covered over the weekend because the offshore team couldn't handle it. These are things that, as a leader, you are going to have to do. There's no getting away from it. And it's not all the time, and it shouldn't be all the time if you're managing your workload correctly. I think that's the key thing. I think if it, like I said earlier, if it gets to a Friday at 5 o'clock every week and you're like, I've still got all my calls to mark, that's probably on you a little bit. But I think as a leader, you just need to go in accepting that you're probably not going to be working 9 to 5 every day, 5 days a week, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think if it becomes a frequent occurrence, I think that's a conversation you should have with your leader and look inwards a little bit, look at your schedule, look at your responsibilities. Are there things that you can be a little bit more efficient on? Are there things you could automate, delegate, really go through that motion? But yeah, I think it's going to happen 15, 20% of the time. Let's face it.
Yeah, it is what it is. And I know I'm a big one. I hate when meetings get put in at lunchtime. If a meeting gets put in between the hours of 12 and 2, kills me. It absolutely kills me, because I know not all the departments have, like, they can take lunch whenever they want. But as leaders, we have to make sure that there's at least 1 or 2 of the leaders around to make sure that the queues are covered, make sure that people have that support network. But sometimes you just have to miss your lunch. Like sometimes there are meetings that crop up that are important enough that I'm only getting a 30-minute lunch today instead of an hour, or maybe I'm not getting lunch at all and I'm just going to be having a little snack in the meeting. And you just have to accept that's part of the role, that's part of the responsibility that you take on. And again, I think you made a really excellent point. If it's all the time and a regular issue, regular recurrence, please do take that with your manager. It shouldn't be all the time. But I think if there's new leaders listening to this, just accept that it's going to happen. It is what it is.
That brings us to having conversations that aren't comfortable. So difficult conversations that maybe where you just think to yourself like, holy moly, how did I even get into this conversation right now with this person?
Yeah.
I made the point before, Bill. The one thing that as a new leader, I was thinking was I never knew as a leader I would end up being a counselor because you get into leadership and some of the conversations you have with your people or external people, you go, oh, holy moly, like I am in no way prepped for this psychologically to have this conversation, especially as a new leader. You're like, oh, well, what do I do here? Do I cry alongside them? Because this is very emotional right now. When do I ask them if they're okay? That kind of stuff. It's an absolute mind warp when you first start.
Yeah, because I think when people come in to being a leader, they expect that they're going to have some tough conversations. I think most people would go in knowing that at some point you're going to have a performance conversation with someone that's not doing well. Maybe potentially at some point you have to be a part of a conversation and let someone go. I don't think anyone expects the counselor thing. I think we could get that printed on a t-shirt, like I'm a team leader and a counselor. I think you could have that as a Zoom background, right?
Special vibes unit now, / counselors unit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like special vibes unit counselors division. Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, the whole department is actually that division because it's just one of those regular things. Now, I'm gonna share a little bit of a story because you really hit the nail on the head around not being prepared for these kind of conversations. And Some of them come a little bit left of field. Now, I'm going to give a bit of a trigger warning for this story. So it is pretty hectic. So if you are sensitive to those kind of things, I'd maybe recommend skipping ahead 3 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more, and then seeing where we're at in the conversation, because it is pretty full on, right? Now, I was a team leader 2 months at this point. It was a bunch of years ago. I'd gotten the role. I was still on secondment, and I had a consultant that's performance had all of a sudden just fallen off a cliff. It had literally gone from being one of my best performers, being one of the worst, like massive amounts of after call. Adherence was like 80% when the target was like 93 or something, just fallen off a cliff. So as a new leader, I was still learning, but I was still of the mind that I shouldn't be going up to someone coming down on them like a ton of bricks. I should pull them apart, just ask them like gently, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And the answer I was given was something that was, to this day, I don't know if I could have ever prepared for this conversation. And so again, trigger warning. Basically, what had happened is my employee had a daughter and the daughter had a son, and they had found out that someone had been sexually assaulting the son. And off the back of that, the daughter was then feeling really suicidal. And so my employee was obviously dealing with the weight of what had happened to her grandson, dealing with the fact that her daughter was suicidal, dealing with fears for what would happen to the grandson, and turned to me with that, and turned to me for advice and support and leadership. And even now, I don't think, if I've had that conversation once before, I don't think I would be remotely emotionally equipped to have that conversation again. And it was just something that I was so unprepared for. And before we caught up with this for this meeting, Jules, I told you that was not the only story I had like that in the first couple of months. I had some really hectic ones. And so it does become a conversation to how do you handle those kind of really heavy emotional responses? I know what I would do, but I will throw to you, Jules. What do you do if you get a conversation like that? If it's something that's really deep, really personal, the person's like really hurting, how do you help them? What do you do as a leader to manage that yourself?
Yeah, first of all, when Bill was telling me the story before the podcast started, I wish I could record my face because I was
Jules like down here, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was just like, what? You're 100%. Even now, to have that conversation will just take a lot of energy. The first thing, the best thing I can provide in terms of tips, in terms of handling a conversation like that, or just difficult conversations that are quite emotional, where you almost have to be a pseudo counselor, is listen, acknowledge, respond situation, right? Well, we've been taught this as service people forever and a day, but the reason we get taught it actually works. When somebody's telling you something like this is not your job to jump in and straight away give them solutions. When we say the pseudo counselor part, we're not actually counselors, guys. We're not actual professionals that can have those conversations with them. You should 100% send them to employee assistance.
On the money.
Send them to resources out there, whether within the company or outside the company. That's the first thing you should 100% do once they've had their say. But while they're talking, all you need to be doing is shut up and listen, right? Just listen to them, talk through their problems. You're there just to be a sounding board in those first few minutes of that conversation. And then just empathize, right? You just jump in and go, geez, I don't even know where to start with that. Like, I thank you, first of all, trusting me and sharing the information with me. I feel blessed, so to speak, that you would even trust me enough to share the information. I'm a new leader in this case, in your case, this scenario. But even if you're an existing leader, the fact that somebody would trust you enough to share the information is insanely awesome. Like, you should feel blessed about that fact. And then you go to, okay, talk me through what support you have. Who are you talking to right now? Can we get you in front of employee assistants, that kind of stuff? So the listen part is just being silent, let them have their say, let them be emotional. It's fine if they cry. That's an emotional response. And in this scenario, a completely fair response. And then that acknowledging piece around, okay, thank you for trusting me. I wouldn't even know how to be in this situation. Thank you for sharing that. And then that piece around, can we get you some support within the organization? I think that's, for me, the way that has worked for me in the past as well.
Yeah, and I think you hit a lot of really good points. You touched on it very briefly, but with stuff like this, we are not counselors. This is beyond my pay grade, right? Then, now, forever beyond my pay grade. Most workplaces, especially here in Australia, you have employee assistance program. If they're not already speaking to a counselor, 100% refer that, which is what I did at the time. And I also made sure that conversation happened immediately. That can happen right now at workplace, work time. I don't care about you being on the phones. I don't care about work, even a little bit right now. My employees, the most important thing to me, their happiness, their health, their safety.
One more thing to share, I think, as well, while you were talking about that, Bill, is ask them permission before you do this, but share that with your leader as well, because I think if you've noticed, like in this scenario, you're saying you've noticed that person's like performance has slipped a little bit or whatever. It's really good to then go to your leader because I've had a chat with X, Y,
You're
Z.
stealing my points and you're skipping ahead for me.
Oh, sorry, brother. Yeah, sorry.
No,
Actually, do you want to?
no, don't need to. Don't need to. You are perfect and you've hit the nail on the head. But
Yeah.
you've missed off one key thing around going to your leader as well. And that is you need to be kind to yourself. Right? You need to look after your own mental health, your own mental well-being, and that's leaning on your support networks too. And it's something when you're going through a conversation that's as hectic as the one I had, that impacted my mental health. And I'm not even the one going through it, but knowing that these things are happening, like it's really shocking, it's really jarring. And so I think you're right. I think you hit the nail on the head. Definitely ask permission for them to share that with your leader, because you just to let them know, just say, look, obviously you're going through a lot right now. I'd love to be able to let my leader know. I won't tell them all of the details. I won't tell them all the information. You can have that conversation yourself. If you want to, you don't have to, but I at least need to let them know roughly what's going on and why we're going through what we're going through. And then it's also about maybe yourself. Don't feel ashamed yourself to lean on your own support network, whether that's talking to your family, whether that's yourself reaching out for counseling off the back of these conversations. It's something that I think is really underrated. As leaders, you will, I promise you this, you will take on a lot from your employees. They will feel a lot of things. They'll go through some really tough emotional situations and they'll come to you for it, and it will weigh on you a little bit. And you'll try to tell yourself that it won't, but I promise you it will. And just feel comfortable to share where you can, what you can, to help get that off your chest. You know what I mean?
I want to take this moment to reach out to all of you guys. If anyone is struggling with things like this, or whether you're a frontline worker or a leader, whatever you are, if you are struggling with things like this in your life, reach out for support, whether that be within or outside of your company or workplace, your family members. You might be listening from different countries. I don't know what resource in every country, but you've got like Beyond Blue and all those things that really support people with challenges like this. So reach out. I think in this day and age, we have information at our fingertips. Don't be afraid to reach out and have those conversations with people. And sometimes an external person's point of view might really help you put things really clearly and give you steps forward to work on as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's so many resources out there nowadays for things like that. Like I said, just don't take it on yourself, because it will weigh on you more than you think it'll weigh on you, and it will be quite emotionally heavy. And I think that is, to summarize our point, it's just something that I was not expecting at all as a leader. Like the amount of things that, like, especially if you look at a lot of young employees, like there was a point in my career where I had a team, and I think I had a team of 11 people, and I think 6 of them were girls around 23 to 18. And just the drama, the bickering, the like literally having to sit people away from each other and all the kind of stuff that like parents and teachers do. Like I was doing all of those things. And I think you don't expect to have to do that part of the role as much going in. Just be prepared that if you are becoming a leader, you're going to have to.
So you brought the mood down, Bill. I might bring something in to bring the mood up a little bit. I'll share a funny story. Apart from being a senior performance coach, one of the things that I used to do was also run conversation workshops, or just say how people have sales conversations and service conversations. And during COVID, obviously we all went Teams, etc. So there was like moments where, you get where everyone's on the Zoom, you can see everyone kind of chatting with you instead of having a physical workshop. One of the times that this happened, I was running a workshop and I could see, just like you, Bill, he was wearing glasses, right? Old mate on the workshop, he was wearing glasses and everyone was talking. We were having a conversation and I can see through his glasses that he's watching a video on one of his screens, and there's no mistaking the type of video this was. If I was to share to people out there, please don't get offended, but what he was watching was porn. There's no other way to put it. It was straight out adult entertainment. I was half expecting to see a Naughty America being flashed on there, but he was like, you could see him watching it, and I was looking at it for like 2 minutes, and I was like, what is that on his glasses? I reached out to I remember, and these are the weird things as leaders, right? You don't anticipate you have to come across. You think people are going to be adults in workplaces, but these kind of high school kind of weird things that people don't happen, but they do. They just, the weirdest things happen. And I remember like reaching out to this like and be like, messaging with him was, hey mate, I can see what you're watching on the screen. You might want to shut it down. And I remember he just like went really red.
Left the Zoom, probably?
Yeah, he left the whole meeting. I didn't see. I don't think I saw him ever again. I remember reaching out to his leader a week later and was like, "Oh, what happened?" Like he pretty much resigned from that point.
I don't even know if I respect it. Just I couldn't even imagine the thought process around sitting at work and being like, "This meeting's pretty boring. You know how to make this better?" Like of all the things that you could be watching, you could have YouTube on, whatever. But all the things you'd be like, I feel like this is spices. This is the spice this meeting needs, just to give it a little je ne sais quoi.
Correct.
Jeez,
Like, I
dude.
just don't, I just didn't know what to think at that point, apart from it took me about 2 to 3 minutes to figure out what he was watching. I was just like, I don't know, looking at it like a couple of consultants were having like a conversation amongst themselves. It was just like a group activity thing. And I was like looking at his thing. I was like, what's going on? I was like, I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's definitely what's happening right there. So you're going to get weird and wonderful things happen as a leader that are going to really challenge you. Yeah, correct. It's going to stretch you massively. And I think as Bill said before, is reach out for support, but also share these stories. If it's a fun story or it's like a little bit awkward or whatever, and as long as you're not harming anyone, talk to your colleagues. I think Bill put up a post before on our TikTok around, don't be afraid to use your colleagues as a resource and reach out to the people around you. But if you're having these weird and wonderful things happen to you, guaranteed they're probably having very similar things, and they can talk you through things that you can do. But also just that the act of sharing helps you understand what you need to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think gets you through some of those like the tough moments. I think some of the difficult conversations, knowing there's plenty of like fun there as well, and there is plenty of joy to be found being a team leader. Whether I don't know about yourself, Jules, I make fun of myself to my team all the time. They love it. Just if I would do something that's stupid, I do it all the time. The other day, I was literally helping one of my guys, and I gave him some advice. I was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's this," and it turns out it was wrong, and the two of us are completely off base. And so I just sent him this like GIF of two clowns, and it's like clown to clown conversation. But sent it to him, and it popped up on his screen whilst he was on the middle of a call. You do need to be able to have fun as a leader. And I think for all of those like serious and heavy emotional moments, you need to make sure that you are yourself bringing enjoyment to work. I've seen so many videos actually lately online, specifically on TikTok, for people just talking about don't enjoy work, like don't give work your everything. You should be changing jobs all the time. You shouldn't be trusting your coworkers. And I hate all of it. You should absolutely, I'm not saying give your entire life to an organization, but I am saying like, there's no reason to not have a good time at work. Like life is too short to spend your time hating 40 hours a week. You know what I mean?
And I think to take it back to what you said before, be the change you want to see, right? If you're going to sit there and complain that work's boring, the atmosphere is not great, what are you doing about it? Are you going in and making sure people have a great experience yourself as a leader? Are you talking to other people in the office? The story I've got right now is the workplace we're in right now, where both of us work, aren't the main hubs of the business, so to speak. So when I first started working, there wasn't anyone from the departments that personally look after in work. And I remember thinking, oh, geez, most of these guys are pretty like snobby. They're not talking to me, and they're all kind of sitting there in their really nice suits and stuff. And I remember thinking that personally. And now, like a year and a half later, the amount of relationships I built within that office, and the people that I thought were really snooty and whatever were actually like really nice people. I haven't had the opportunity to chat with them. I'm looking at their work face, because some people have resting face.
Resting work face?
Yeah. I think if you look at my face and I'm like full concentrated, you probably wouldn't like me either. But like, so I think it's just you tend to judge people based on what they look like while they're working. You don't know what they're actually like though. Another kind of segue I've got for that is another difficult thing, and the thing that a lot of people don't talk about as a leader, is having to have difficult conversations and performance conversations with people that are personally really great human beings. They're probably not fit for the role though. And that's the crushing part. Like, you love this person, they're an absolute banger of a human being, but God, they're probably not suited for the job. And that's a soul crushing one. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things about being in a role sometimes is having those performance conversations, but it is even more tough when you have a personal connection with that human being. Because again, like we've said it a couple of times, you'll end up being like parents to these people. You will form an emotional attachment to these people, and then having to sit down and when you know that they're probably never going to get there. I think that's the hardest thing. And I think it's probably something that's not spoken enough. Like you're not as a leader supposed to say that, right? I've never had a person that I've sat with a conversation with and I've been coaching and I'm like, oh yeah, this person. Maybe you think I can get them there. But you do know when someone's probably never really going to be a right fit for the role. It just like the things that they have to do just don't mesh with the things that they can do. And some people just aren't for it. And I think the problem for me with that, a lot of businesses these days treat current performance as the be all and end all when it comes to moving. And I think sometimes you've got to look at someone and go, right person, right role. I vividly remember in my previous workplace, there was this one girl who she had ADHD and she was just a bit forgetful on the phones. But she would have been one of the best people in like an operations role. Like she was just like as much as she was all over the shop with some things, she was so organized, actually organizing things. The only way I could say it. Because we also had a culture club and she was like the person that used to do like actually put everything together, put all the packs together and stuff for the organization for the culture club. And they were all incredible. All the events she planned, unbelievably good. But when it comes to organizing her thoughts whilst having a conversation on a phone call, she just couldn't do it. And it's just one of those things. And like her current leader at the time was just refusing to let her leave because her actual stats were not good. And to me, that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, because I'm like, you're not only hurting her, you're hurting yourself and the business. Yeah. Everybody wins if we get her in an operational role. And
yeah, this might not be the role for you. Doesn't mean there's no roles out there for you. And I think that's the way to have those conversations for me. Is not about sitting there and going, hey, mate, you're pretty trash at the job. It's about going, okay, let's have a chat. I think putting a few things unemotionally when you're having that conversation, go, okay, so look at the last 6 months, 3 months, whatever, you're how do you think you're tracking? And hopefully they've been reflective enough to go, yeah, probably not that well. Or you've done enough of a job of kind of introducing some of those things to their thought processes so that they come to the realization they're probably not tracking well. And then from that point going, is there anything that you love about this job, etc.? And I think that's your kind of segue into maybe there are opportunities out there that aren't this job that you would like to consider. And I think it's going, okay, listen, let's have a conversation about, do you really want to be here? Do you really think this is the role for you? And if you don't think that, as a leader, I would love to support you to get you to something that you think you would love or might suit your personal abilities a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with shaping the career goals of people to something that you think would help them and support them better, right? Obviously, it's someone else's life. I'm never going to sit here and tell someone what they cannot do and you cannot go for that role. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having that conversation and just being like, I think you're really skilled at these things. I think you are phenomenal at this. I literally have someone in my team right now, and you know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm not going to name any names. But they were trying to convince me that they wanted to go in this operations role. But I've been using them as a SME, as a coach, as a buddy. And they are phenomenal coaching. So unbelievably good for a frontline consultant at coaching. And not only that, I see the way it lights up their face when they do it as well. Like I've seen, like when we talk about the things that they've done, the things that they've helped people achieve, I can see how much they love coaching and supporting. And so I had that conversation in a one-on-one. And I was just like, I honestly think you should look towards this because you're so good at it and you love it and you love it. And I think as long as you're framing it from that positive perspective, even if they don't want to, they tell me to get stuff, that's fine. I'm not their boss, I am, but not like in terms of their life, I'm not. And if they want to stick to their path, that's fine. But I think as a leader, it's your duty to let people know, because sometimes maybe they're not aware. Like that person, you would know as well, because you actually work in office with him, you see him in person. He didn't realize how much he loved it until you and I were like, but you obviously love it.
Yeah, correct. 100%. Like, you're the most passionate I've ever seen you while you're coaching.
He loves it.
Yeah, he's a coach in denial, is what I tell him all the time. He would know this if he's ever listened to this. Love you. But you're a coach in denial. But yeah, 100%.
I'm going to start using that one when I talk to him, actually, I reckon. At work on Monday. That's what I'm going to call him.
Yeah,
change his email signature.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, like John Smith, coaching denial. 100%, Bill. Summarizing everything, there's definitely a lot of things that are not so great about leadership. We thought it's important that we share it with you guys, especially if you're thinking about getting into leadership. I think these are things to consider. Can I stomach some of these things, so to speak? Or if you're already a leader, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, crap, you know what I mean? And hopefully we've given you some tools to help you make those difficult moments a little bit less difficult. They're still going to be difficult. There's no hiding from that. So hopefully going through that, the boredom factor, you've got downward pressure from your leadership, and then just the workload as a leader or a manager. And the last thing we just spoke about right now, which is difficult conversations that are quite emotionally draining and sometimes physically draining as well, that you need to have with people.
One last thing to take away from this one is obviously there are a lot of pressures of being a team. There's a lot of things that you maybe didn't expect. And I think what is really important to take away is that ultimately a lot of these things do sit with you. So if you heard all those things and nothing sounded like too scary to put you off and you're in the role, I think just make sure that you're taking the initiative and you're being the one that drives those things. No one's going to come and save you. No one's going to fix it for you. You're the leader now, and it's up to you to do the leadership things, as we said at the start. Now, as always, if you've enjoyed the episode today, please do drop us a follow, drop us a subscribe. It helps us out an absolute ton. And as always, if there's anything you would have liked to hear us go a little bit more in detail of, drop a comment and let us know. The same is true if there's anything you want in any future episodes. We are very much keen to hear from you guys, to hear from our community.
See you later, leadership gangsters.